So, goedemorgen. Um, today, good morning. Today we're here to do my guest lecture on ethnobotany. My name is Has Cornelissen and I'm from the Psychotropic Institute. I have a background in physics and I used to do the legalized tree trade. Here you see my family. And with legalize, we have always active, have it's like an activism against the prohibition. So I'm in favor of sensible drug policy. Um, I'm very much in favor of taking control over controlled substances. So I will, from that, we work together with smart shops, party drugs, street drugs, and yeah, from that emerged Psychotropica, which is basically more scientific institute where we do testing and education programs, and we try to fill the gaps that science brings in drug policy to make sense out of it. Um, it might seem that I'm very much in favor of cannabis, but I want you to be aware that cannabis has some serious disadvantages. And the most severe is that it slows emotional growth, especially in adolescent brains. Cannabis can cause severe irreversible damage. So please do be careful with that drugs and with other psychoactive substances as well, even coffee and sugar. Today we're going to study the how to study psychoactive substances, something about that, traditional plant medicines, because that's the topic. Land history is cannabis. We need to make some differentiation for fiber hemp, recreational cannabis, and medicinal cannabis. And the legal aspects will be through all that, like a book. If you want to study psychoactive substances, it's not difficult, but it's complex. The reason that it's complex are three of it. First is the interdisciplinarity of it. So like basically all the ivory towers of the university, the disciplines in the university have something to do with psychoactive substances. So not only horticulture, but also anthropology or arts or war and peace. And well, all these things have something and they scratch the surface, and only together as a real interdisciplinary person you could study this. These are university studies, and for graduate school and Dutch hogeschool, where you really build the reflective practitioners that are really needed in this field. Actually, there are even more disciplines that have to deal with it, complex fields. For instance, social workers, policemen, but also, well, you could imagine the person who's really dealing with the drugs. Actually, he would be very good if he was educated thoroughly. Then the other reason that it's complex is that there's a spectrum of psychoactive substances. It's not one. You can see here a way to structurize it for stimulants, antipsychotics, or depressants, where you can see some, and there's an overlap continuously, and it's difficult to get really sense out of it. This has also been tried in the UK, where you can see the harm scale on drugs is a very important graph actually. On the x-axis you can see the type of psychoactive substance, and on the y-axis you can see the harm scale, harm to self, harm to others, and it's all specified to the different colors. And totally on the left, the most dangerous one is alcohol, and then heroin, crack cocaine, methamphetamine, cocaine, well, you can see it on your own screen, I guess. And in the end is mushrooms, and somewhere in the middle there is cannabis. It's a bit left of the middle, but it's like a third of what the dangers of alcohol are. Although it is much more difficult to get a legal thing around it. Okay, the third reason of the fact that it's difficult to study psychoactive substances is the prohibition itself. It's difficult to research it independently. There's a lot of framing and stigmatizing, and the financial structures to do research or science are mainly for addiction and law and order, and well, not for the rest. And you have to imagine that like LSD is like the microscope for biology, is said a lot. And so is LSD the microscope would be for biology. For neurology, we learn a lot about brain structures, and so forth and so on. So these three things, interdisciplinarity, spectrum of drugs, and prohibition, make that the Psychotropic Institute is there. We're too small to make real big sense. Okay, we go to your topic, which is the ethnobotany, traditional use of plants, and we have we diverted in four things that are very you can really see them. First one is the fermented fruits, where we make alcohol from, and it's in the end, it's our disaffection. Alcohol, as you might know, is the beginning of the pharma as we know it today. And it was used in the beginning as there was no pure drinking water, so you could better drink beer in the Middle Ages. And even elephants love to have fermented fruit, and then they make a lot of problems in villages, etc. This still happens today. Even monkeys do this. So that's where alcohol goes. Another important one is coca. Coca leaves has been used by the indigenous South American people like the Incas, and forever since. These were quite great cultures like the Egyptians 10,000 years ago. And some hipster things happened later with Coca-Cola, putting some additives from the coca leaf in it, some alkaloids that they had to remove later because of prohibition. And a very famous one was Vin de Mariana that you can see in the upper right. I think that's also where my face is, but I'm sorry for that. Vin de Mariani actually was a liquor with coca, and was mega popular in the high society. So popes, actors, writers. It was the beginning of advertisement as well. Cocaine was derived by the pharma, and it was a great anesthetic against pain, where you could operate someone where less blood came out because of the veins that would basically close that. In World War I, cocaine was used a lot for the soldiers. Because they could continue to go to war and they had less pain of all their wounds. Then we have another traditional plant medicine, which is opium, coming from the poppy. We have to take into account that the Netherlands and the UK got very rich out of opium, and the opium wars in China and Indonesia. And we had a very big opium problem in the 80s in the Netherlands because we derived heroin from it, which is a very strong opiate that makes you feel dizzy and no pain. Makes you feel perfectly sane, but all the rest is less important. So you lose friends, etc., etc. It is also in medicine. Codeine is a opiate derived medicine, and morphine we can't live without it in hospitals. And nowadays it's in America there was a commercial pharmaceutical company that pushed fentanyls and oxycodone on the market, which is 10-fold stronger than heroin. So you just need a little bit, and then already you ease the pain. This is a gigantic problem, as you can see in the lower right, with growing numbers of people getting hooked on fentanyls. And it's also, this crisis is coming towards Europe. And I would advise everybody to be absolutely careful with this kind of medicine. Especially the last bit is very difficult to get rid of. It's like cigarettes, very addictive. Tobacco, we could have done with it as well. I can eat, yeah. Then we go to the topic that we need to go to is hemp. It's always been there actually, and what we're going to talk about mainly is the sensimilia, which is hemp without seeds. So as you all know, as plant knowers in Wageningen, that sensimilia, that's where plants go without seed, and that's also where the cannabis comes from. And then that's when you get these big buds, because the plant continues to make flowers, and the flowers is where the THC and the high feeling comes from. Where plants that make seed, they put all their energy into seed making, which is a different process. You can see the brown thing there, that's hashish. It's resin of the flower. We'll talk about that later. And you see the yellowish glass type stuff that's basically shatter or wax. The oil of cannabis is considered a hard drugs, so it's on the opium list #1. And on the right lower end, you see some spice, which is not popular in the Netherlands. And basically, it's some herb with some synthetic cannabinoids on it. In the Netherlands, it's not famous here, but in the UK, for instance, it's easy to buy. And the counter effects are quite serious. There are some serious problems emerge with that. Here you can see about hash making. It's good. You see the flower there, very big bud. And if you look into with a microscope, you see all these glass points there. And if you see that one like a mushroom type of thing that's called a trichome. That's one glass bulb. And this is where actually all the active ingredients come from. And you see on the lower end, you see two types of hash making. So the brown stuff that you could see earlier there on the right top. On the left, you can see the Moroccan way, they drum it out. They drum the trichomes through a sieve, and then they collect it, and they make pollen of it. And on the right hand, they rub their hands around the flower, where they get this black hands of the hearts actually, and that's called charas. You can make the round circles of that. It's very soft hashish. Okay, we have to know a little bit more about cannabis. Seeds, they have been found 150,000 years old, and it seems that they can't be contained longer in earth. It's not like a prehistoric amphibia you will find into rocks. But you can still say this must be a cannabis seed. The pollen, although, have been found even 20 million years old. You have to take into account that the Homo sapiens is only 2 million years old. So cannabis was here earlier, was here first. And we also know that in the Bronze Age, it has already been domesticated. So the people have always thought it was important. So we found some proof 1 year ago that the Chinese were smoking it. And we found also some proof, it was last week, that it was found in churches in Israel where they used the herb. They found some THC in some leftovers in a temple. There was there for more than 3,000 years. So some things have been going on, although now it's illegal. If you go into history, you could look at that further. And what is interesting is that it's found in pharmacopoeia around the world. Pharmacopoeia, as you know, are books of medicines. And cannabis has always been in there until actually it has been forbidden approximately 100 years ago. So we have to make a little differentiation to make it easier. There are three ways of how we use cannabis. It's important to state that. The fiber, hemp, and the marijuana stuff, weed or grass, which we call recreational cannabis and medicinal cannabis. So the same package could be as evidence. As like with the real plants of cannabis, there's a cross-contamination between these three differentiations. First, the fiber hemp. It's strictly regulated in every country, and this is based on how much THC is in the plant. And in the Netherlands, it's 0.2, which is really difficult to bake, although we have 900 acres of hemp in the Netherlands. In Switzerland, for instance, and in Italy is 1% of THC, which is way easier to grow. You make fibers of it, and you can see already the fibers. Cannabis is known for the longest soft fiber in nature. Also, you can make easily oil of it. We can use it for isolation, for mats, for ropes, for sails. As you know, we would never have been able to go into the golden age without cannabis ropes. The seeds are highly nutritious. They contain 4 out of 8 essential nutritious acids. It's the only natural product that does this. And then we also have the cannabinoids that are into these flowers, into the flowers even of the outdoor plants. And that's then not the THC, but other cannabinoids where Lisette already told you about. So here you can see how it's, this is modern Dutch machine where you see the long fiber hemp stems. They're way longer than the cannabis used in coffee shops. And they separate the above part from the stem. And the stem is used for the fiber, and the flower is used for oils, for seeds, and for the cannabinoids. In the Netherlands, this separation is in the end, the upper part they have to throw away. So that's why it's separated. And sometimes it's illegally sent towards Germany, where it's legal to make other cannabinoids and etc. off. Only the seeds are legal in the Netherlands. You see, this is already strictly regulated. It's even more regulated than like a biological tomato that you could be buying, or something like that. The ship on the left is important because that's typically Dutch. We would not have been able to sail. The sails, the ropes, the flags, everything was made of hemp if it wasn't wood. And even in World War II, this is an American poster, grow hemp for the war. It was really needed. As you can see, also there is a hemp rope next to the guy. CBD is one of the cannabinoids, and it's the funny thing, it's because it's oil derived of cannabis plant, it's a hard rock considered, like heroin, amphetamine. It's on list number 1 still. In the most other countries, it's called cannabis light. In Belgium, you're allowed to buy it. In Italy, you're allowed to buy it there. But it's called cannabis light. It doesn't make you stoned, but it does. For instance, Switzerland, it's used in cigarettes that's without nicotine, so it helps you to stop smoking. In the Netherlands, though, it's forbidden. So you could, in some coffee shops, you can buy the flower. The oil is legal in the Netherlands and is even sold in kruidvat. And the oil is not against smoking, but it helps you against everything, if you should believe the advertisement. You can see for yourself if it does, if it doesn't. It is considered a novel food these days, which makes this, also the picture you see here, it's in the Netherlands we can still sell this, but in other countries it's different at the moment. We have to wait actually 2 years until the novel food regulation is fully in place. Novel food means that we have to prove, or producers have to prove that it's okay to use it and that it does help, that it is efficacious for the things that they say. We have a little film here from the European Monitor Center for Drugs and Addiction, the EMCDDA, which is basically the European Trimbos, you might know Trimbos, institute, where they gather all information on drugs.
Cannabis has been known as a psychoactive plant for several hundred years, and it was introduced to Europe around the 18th and 19th centuries. International drug control generally started just over 100 years ago in 1912 with the International Convention on Opium. This controlled opium and morphine and cocaine in the form of controlling trade between countries. The idea was that these plants grew in only a few countries in the world and were then shipped to other countries, often without any form of control. Cannabis was added to this list of international control in 1925 at the Second Convention. The modern framework for international drug control comes from 3 United Nations conventions. 1961, which controlled plant materials such as cocaine and cannabis. From 1971, which added the more synthetic substances, and from 1988. The 1988 convention included a controversial clause putting pressure to criminalize personal possession of drugs. And of course, that included cannabis. However, this is not completely compulsory. What we see here on the international level is the first balanced response, whereby countries were originally pressured not to produce or supply cannabis, whereas now countries also have to reduce the demand for cannabis. There have been quite a few government inquiries into the level of control for cannabis. These have come to 3 general conclusions. The first is that cannabis is not a harmless substance and therefore requires some form of control. The second is that those harms have often been overstated, And so the third is questioning whether criminal law is really the most appropriate control for the users. Increasingly, there are models for regulation of cannabis, which means limited, controlled supply for non-medical use. Probably the most famous in Europe is the Dutch system, which started in the 1970s. By 2011, there were 651 what the Dutch called coffee shops across the territory, selling limited amounts of cannabis to over 18-year-olds without selling other drugs, without selling alcohol, without advertising. In the last couple of years, we're starting to see some serious debates and proposals for different models of legalization of cannabis for non-medical purposes. This means designs for regulatory controls over limited distribution systems. Most of these may well be in breach of the letter or the spirit of the United Nations conventions, but their proponents declare their aims are to reduce the harms of the illicit market, to maintain the quality of substances through the regulation of their production, to raise much needed taxes in these times of austerity, and to prioritize limited resources to focus on violent and organized crime gangs.
So that's very much in the line of what I would say. So let's dive into the legal aspects of this. We have opium laws now for 101 years, and cannabis is in the body of the text of these opium things, and we have to take into account that we're talking about the oldest international treaties, worldwide international treaties. So imagine that, for instance, chemical warfare, where you have treaties on that. To breach these treaties is very difficult, and especially because this is such an old one, it's very difficult. The only thing that happens every now and then is that we add text. It's very difficult to get text out, near impossible. We are trying to find ways around that, but it's mega difficult. It's about all the parts of the flower, so the stem is not included, so that makes it easier, but it's still very dangerous. So even the seed sometimes is a problem. Like, for instance, in France, the seed is illegal, although in Spain and the Netherlands you could travel, it can travel easily, so it has to go through air. Right now, the WHO, the World Health Organization, they are rescheduling cannabis because it was in the worst, the most strict is a better name, schedule, and it will go to a schedule where it's also the medicinal powers of cannabis are taken into account. Instantly we see around the globe, we see a shift emerging. So recreational and medicinal cannabis is in some places legal, in other places it's illegal, or it's decriminalized or depenalized. That's also what you can see, and that's where we come back to this, where cannabis can serve as evidence or as a medicine, which makes it quite contradictory. Well, we have recreational cannabis. We have the oldest decriminalized policy, the gedoogbeleid, which is inexplicable in the outside country because it's legal to sell it, it's legal to have it, it's legal to use it, but it's illegal to buy it as a coffee shop. So there's a big criminal, how do you call it, surrounding and the back door of the coffee shop is a big problem. The guy from the NCDDA, Mr. Huge, said we have 560 coffee shops. There's only 512 today. They are closing down quite quickly because they are strictly regulated based on the HAHOG criteria, as you can see there. This goes for advertising hard drugs. Nuisance juveniles are not allowed, as he said. Huge quantities, and residents and inhabitants are not allowed into coffee shops in some areas. The last Y is not really into effect, but in some cities it is. And it's even considered a vital company during COVID-19, as when they had to close like cafes in the beginning, there were very large queues and people were afraid that dealers would step into the market holes that would emerge. This was last March, as you could see. um, Approximately, we have 250 evictions per week in the Netherlands. This is a lot, but these evictions, sometimes the evictions are only 0 plants or 1 plant. Home growers are sometimes also busted by the police, and sometimes these are large grow operations of thousands of plants. And we say that 5 plants should be legal in the Netherlands, but in effect this is not. People are turned out of their social housing and sometimes are not allowed to live with their families within a radius of 50 kilometers of their former house. These are not punishments that you could go to judge for, but this is what happens to people, and you can't do anything about it. The mayor, he's basically in charge of how you get your punishments without a judge coming in between that. Criminal networks takes advantage. We call it undermining nowadays in the Netherlands. And this is quite a big topic we're now trying to set up an experiment that will start next year, where we will have in 10 municipalities, 10 growers. They will give approximately 10% of the coffee shops legal cannabis as an experiment for 6 years. And meanwhile, nothing is happening. So for the next 6 years, 90% of the coffee shops is still has to work for criminal networks. The rest of the world is going very fast. For instance, Lebanon last month really declared that they're going to legalize it. And in South Africa, there's a gigantic industry emerging, but not in the Netherlands. And so, well, this is what it is. And the most Dutch former growers, they are now going across the globe. We have a big brain drain. So we're losing a lot of knowledge. If we go to medicinal cannabis, we have the oldest medicinal program as well. Els Borst, who has been killed with a knife for a crazy nuthead. She invented it, and we have the Bedrocan cannabis, as you can see on the picture. And the second one is coming in the Netherlands. We are waiting for the tender to be chosen out at the current moment. So there are a lot of companies that try to get a second permit, and this will come out in the next couple of months. We only have medicinal cannabis because we have a Bureau of Medicinal Cannabis, the Office of Medicinal Cannabis, that is the owner of all this cannabis, and they are very strict. So we have to treat it like it's plutonium, and the compliance, all the ISO, and then you might know, but good manufacturing practice, good agriculture practice, and this GHP and the GLP laboratory practice is all very important there. It's a gigantic growing industry, and you can see there the top is in 2017. The figures are only going till 2018, but it's still rising. But this is mainly taking into account that there's a big illegal cannabis oil market on the background, which has, for instance, in 2018, there were 16,000 patients at Suvernuver, which is a cannabis social club in Leeuwarden that sends out free cannabis oil to patients on a weekly basis. It's no longer reimbursed by the health insurances, and the doctors they advise not to take cannabis because it's not proven, but people say it's efficacious. So this is quite personal. It's approved only for 6 things today in the Netherlands: glaucoma, Gilles de la Tourette, chronic neurotic pain, nausea, vomiting for cancer patients, some forms of epilepsy, and CBD, and palliative before people die. It's a strong evidence it helps for more conditions, but in other countries have different conditions. So this varies from country to country. These are the Dutch indications that are approved. Oops. Is it a medicine? It doesn't work for everybody, and we don't know all the active ingredients. There are some clinical studies, but also the administration form is very important. And the dosing and the standardizing. The picture is a bit funny, but the acceptance of cannabis is, of course, also not so high. There's also a big difference between what a patient would do or a doctor. The doctor only has a limited choice. He always gives a low dose with less risks, and it takes it oral like a medicine, and it doesn't work for everybody. Where the patient, he can see itself which type of cannabis it uses, because there's the variation definitely is doing something, and he does the dose as he needs it himself. And because he smokes it, he can do that rapidly, but smoking is never advised by a doctor. Also, the clinical trials is difficult to set up, not only because it's illegal, but there are too much parameters of cannabis. How fresh is it? Which cannabinoids? Which terpenes? Which disorder does a person have? What administration form? The available legal cannabis is mainly in a low quality, and indications of decline of efficacy of the chemovar after, if you take a drug longer than the cannabis longer, then it might be less efficacious. And there's a lot of research being done, especially in Israel and in Canada right now. But we're still waiting for the figures, and the funny thing is that it's still uncatchable. It does what it's quite biological drug. Cannabis is a mood enhancer, basically. So if you feel sad, you will feel double sad. If you feel happy, you will feel double happy. If you're drunk, you will be double drunk after taking cannabis. That's basically what it does, apparently. So there are some more difficulties that within one plant, the variation of the containments can be up to 20%. And a lot of testing is illegal, so the coffee shop testing is illegal, and it goes without standards or certification or monographs or cross checks. The scientific testing is, even in the US, people say potency is more important than accuracy. So it's always difficult to say what is right and what is wrong. What we do know is that cannabis molecules can be considered communication molecules on cellular level. So that's basically what the body seems to do. That I compare it to a local newspaper, that it just on cell level, it tells the other cells how it feels. And basically that's what it does. It's too potent for homeopathic alternative medicine, but it's too green for pharma. We really can't grab it. So with that, it's a real personal medicine, and there's much unknown, and there's much to learn. Thank you. I hope you know enough. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me anytime.